Welcome to Ask Dr. B About Music Theory. I have a question from LC Congru. This was asked after watching lesson 1 of my YouTube series. After a bunch of very nice things, LC Congru asks, by the way, do you recommend studying and analyzing classic orchestral pieces? Definitely, especially when goes on to write, I'm trying to be an orchestral composer, but I'm really unfamiliar with a lot of instruments, how they should sound and where they go. Where do you think one should start? If they should start, thanks again for listening. So, back in the day, composers used to study. They didn't go to a college and study music theory and then an ear training class, and then they studied very much in a kind of an apprenticeship type of role. You would apprentice with a master composer, and you would learn by helping them out. You would also learn by studying scores, and that was the most common way to learn as a composer. There are stories of Johann Sebastian Bach getting a hold of Antonin Vivaldi concertos and making transcriptions of them, so changing them from orchestra to a keyboard piece. So Bach was taking the music of Vivaldi, and when he made an arrangement of Vivaldi's piece that was for orchestra, he had to thoroughly analyze it. So a Vivaldi concerto, which is using an orchestra with some solo instrument or instruments, analyzing it, figuring out what's the most critical parts of that, and then reducing it and turning it into a keyboard piece. That's a really great way to look at someone who is a master, learn their techniques, and in this case, turn it into something that you could use in another setting. So you're applying some of those things that you're learning as well. Now, the opposite is also possible. You can take a piano piece and try to convert it into an orchestral piece, but that is definitely not where you should start. If you don't quite understand how the instruments work, you don't want to try to do something you don't know about. So the way Bach did it is the way you should do it. You should take a orchestral piece by a master, and then you should analyze it. You should study it. You should do what Bach did. Turn it into something else, whether that be a keyboard piece or some variation, but something that makes it so that you have to digest that information that you're getting. So so that's the first principle. Absolutely, you want to study the masters. You want to learn what they did. There's no need. Sometimes students studying music theory who want to be composers, they're concerned about being imitators or just regurgitating what has come before. And I kind of think that that's not something you should really be too concerned about. Step 1 is be the kind of person who has opinions, who has likes and dislikes. Listen to everything and feel free to like some things and dislike others. I know I made a mistake early on where I rightfully came to the conclusion that I love music. I then mistakenly came up with the idea that therefore everything that has been done throughout the history of music and has withstood the test of time, I should love. That's just not true. I have particular likes and dislikes that are based on my personality, my preferences. That doesn't mean I can't appreciate everything, but it definitely doesn't mean that I should whitewash and get rid of the idea of my personal preferences. So what I recommend to someone who's becoming a composer, who wants to be an orchestral composer, is listen to a lot of orchestral music, get a score, and Dover is a publisher that does really, inexpensive, very affordable editions, and you can get it, and you can just look at on that. There's websites that have a lot of stuff that's in public domain that you can go and look up. I think it's IMSLP is one of the main websites that has free scores. You can download it, print out the PDF, study it. So absolutely get these scores so that when you're listening to the music, you're also looking at it. And you could be particularly thorough. Let's say you really wanted to understand how each instrument is used. So let's say, and I'm just wrote up here, these are three of my favorite pieces, classical pieces for orchestra, that if I wanted to really delve even deeper, I would start here. So Mendelssohn's Brellochs Overture. I'm actually conducting this right now with an orchestra, so I've been studying it currently. Wonderful piece. I love Mendelssohn, and this overture is delightful. It's not as well known as some of his other pieces. Another piece I love, Dvorak's Ninth Symphony. A lot of people love that piece for very good reason. Samuel Barber, his first essay for orchestra. Samuel Barber is someone who I don't think has achieved as much credit as he deserves as a great composer, but an American composer, wonderful piece. What I would do is I would get the score for one of these pieces or all of these pieces, and I'd look at, let's just say, Brellochs, and I would follow through, and one time I'd listen for, and I'd just watch what the violin ones do. And I'd listen for it, and I'd watch that. And then I would go, violin 2, and I would see how Mendelssohn treats the same instrument differently depending on what it needs to do. Then I would look at the viola part. Then I would look at the cello part. Then I would look at the bass part. Then I would look at the flute part, oboe part, clarinet part, bassoon, trumpet, French horn. So at this point, I probably will be listening to this piece 20 times. You know, and the piece is about 8 minutes in length. You know, so this is something totally doable over the course of a week. You listen to a couple different, listen to the piece 20 times over the course of a week. Let's say 3 times a day. You're doing a half hour of studying per day, and you're going and covering 3 different instruments, and you're just watching and listening. That alone will give you an understanding of how instruments are used by Mendelssohn, who's one of the greatest. And that would be a great place to start. When I was in college, I used Samuel Adler's book, The Study of Orchestration. So a number of my viewers have commented and asked for me to give more information on orchestration. And that's something I definitely want to do, and that definitely is coming up. The study of orchestration is fascinating. The idea of orchestration is, once you have melodies, harmonies, how do you distribute it amongst the instrument? That's one aspect of orchestration. So you have a melody. What instrument plays it? How do you change it from instrument to instrument? What combinations of instruments can create a brand new sound? So we have the sound of a violin, we have the sound of a flute. What if we combine them? What is the sound of violin plus flute? And there's just so many options with the orchestra. The color palette of timbre is so varied that the combinations are nearly infinite. So to sum up for LC Congru, absolutely, it's not too early to get started. First, listen to music. You want to be an orchestral composer? Start figuring out who you love the most. Listen to their music, and then get the score, whether it's from Dover or IMSLP, and look at the score as you listen, and look at just one individual line at a time as you listen, so that you can really focus in and say, oh look, this is how high Mendelssohn writes for this instrument. This is how low. Notice that they often, it's combined with this instrument, but not this instrument. There's a lot of things you can learn by just observing what you see and what you hear. After that, you are going to want to delve more deeply into orchestration, a study of orchestration. And I'm sure there's some great resources out there, and I hope to be one of those great resources down the road and give you a bunch of orchestration information. One last concept that I want to leave you with, and this comes from when I was first learning how to play jazz, and transcribing is the best way, not the only way, but the best way to learn how to become a good jazz player. The idea of transcribing is that you find a jazz piece you like, and by using your ear alone, you figure out what it is note by note. So if you're a saxophonist, you might listen to Dexter Gordon, and you would then by listening to the recording, figure out how to play every single note Dexter Gordon plays in his solo by ear. So what that does is, one, is it's amazing ear training. Then you're also learning things like tone, articulation, note choice, harmonic choice, rhythmic placement. After you've done all that and you figured it out, and that might require a lot of stopping and starting to figure it out. It might take a while to do that. You then play along with the recording, and you try to match, almost like you're doing an impersonation of Dexter Gordon. And by doing that, you're doing a similar thing to what I was talking about here with studying scores. You're learning from the masters, and then you're trying to make that into something you can digest and understand. Now, with this concept of transcribing, I know that for me, I had to start off with fairly simple solos, and most jazz solos were pretty complicated. So it might be the case that you want to pick an orchestral piece to start with that is not particularly complicated in terms of how the instruments are used. I think Mendelssohn's a good place to start. I think all of these three composers I chose are good, but I wouldn't go with someone like Stravinsky, who is a master at using instruments, but he's at a whole nother level of complexity. And if you find that Mendelssohn, Dvorak, and Barber are a little complex, you might want to take it back. Go back historically, go back and study what Mozart did. Learn how Mozart used instruments, where you're dealing with both orchestration, less instruments are involved. Harmonically, there's there's a little less complexity than sometimes you would find in the late Romantic composers. So what you have to also do is kind of gauge where you are on the learning curve. You don't want to take on a task that's so complicated that you get frustrated or you never really understand what's going on. You want to pick something that's a challenge, but that's attainable with hard work. And that's your goal. So that might mean you want to start with a fairly simple Mozart piece. That's fine, as long as it's giving you something new to learn. Mozart's a master. You will learn from Mozart. You will learn from any of these composers. The big question for you is, which composer do you like? Use your preferences. And then something that's within your grasp. And when you're using your preferences, what that'll do is, after you've listened to hundreds of symphonies, hundreds of orchestral pieces, and that's really what you're going to do. I mean, if you want to be an orchestral composer, you have to love orchestral music, which means you have to love hearing it, experiencing it. And if you pick your favorite aspects of 200 different orchestral pieces and say, this is my favorite thing in this piece, this is my favorite thing in this piece, you then combine those things, all your personal favorites, into one thing, it will be something unique. You do not have to worry about being an imitator. Your personal preferences of hundreds of different examples of the past can yield a unique combination, and that alone will be something valuable. Even if you don't come up with anything new or original on your own, the combination will be original and will be unique. Once you've done that, then to make it to the upper echelon of composers, you then do something that no one's ever done before. And that's why people like Mozart, Mendelssohn, Dvorak, Samuel Barber, that's why these people are in the history books, because they took their personal preferences, their favorite things of every piece that they heard before, they combined it into what they liked, and then they were able to figure out something new even on top of that. And that's when you're at that highest level of composition. So I hope that answers your question, and go listen, go study, and go compose.